What's up, guys? Scotty2Hockey here, aka the Average Hockey Fan, once again. And with not a lot of moves being made by the Montreal Canadiens this offseason, a lot of criticism has come on Marc Bergevin as a GM. Obviously, not as much as he took last offseason, although most of the deals he made last offseason worked out, especially Domi for Galchenyuk and the Pacioretty trade. But he has faced a lot of criticism this offseason for not bringing in a big guy to help the power play, and not a huge name left-handed defenseman. Ben Sherratt for me is a good pickup, but he's not a huge name. So I said, hello, fellow Habs fans. What are your opinions of Marc Bergevin as a GM? I'm doing a Bergy video on my Habs channel this week due to a lot of criticism he's taken for not doing a whole lot this offseason, and would love to know your thoughts on the subject. And boy, did I ever get a lot of opinions, so bear with me, guys. Mike Vini on Twitter says he showed his inexperience earlier in his tenure, but also some potential. He always had a knack for finding very useful players for next to nothing. His drafting started out below average, but he has learned to trust his advisors. He's come into his own the last 2 years, especially last offseason. Like I said, last offseason was a lot of home runs for Bergy. That Domi for Galchenyuk trade was excellent. We got Nick Suzuki in the Pacioretty trade, and Tatar and a pick. Hockey Epic on Twitter says underrated and underappreciated. He's got the hardest job in the sport, and he doesn't give in to the media and fan pressure. He's got a plan, and he follows it. Made some fantastic trades and signings. Like every other GM, he's missed on some too. It's part of the job. He doesn't get enough credit. Habs Lifer on Twitter says overall a C. Although he had a good core, the draft and development of players were brutal. He surrounded himself with complete stooges in SL and the AHL and MT as Habs coaches, both horrible. Lately seems better with the draft and changed coaches. Chuck Elliott on Twitter says not crazy about his first few years. I thought he lacked direction and the moves he made were all over the place. The last 3 seasons or so he's been really strong. He has built a solid future with smart trades and great drafting. Habs will be a force in 2 or 3 years, and that seems to be the consensus that in 2 or 3 years Habs should be, if not a solid playoff team, a Stanley Cup contender. Mike P. Seeker on Twitter says any GM who makes good deals and bad deals. My biggest MB criticism would be holding on to Tyrion and LeBeau for way too long. I'm sorry, guys, I murdered that name. Lefebvre, way too long. Combined, they held the team back for years. Ethan on Twitter says he's not Sam Pollock, but he's a pretty great GM. Unlike most GMs, he hasn't had a stinker of a trade and has had quite a few steals. He's the longest tenured GM in the NHL, which shows just how much ownership trusts him. I trust MB to make the right decisions. Andrew on Twitter, this is a really good comment. He says MB shows traits and signs of a great long-term GM. Generally wins his trades, refuses to mortgage the future for a run, learns from his mistakes, seemingly involved in all conversations, adapted to the new NHL in short order, spoken well of by his players. Great comment by Andrew. Sorry if I butchered that, guys. There's quite a few comments to go through on this, and a lot of people have different opinions. Sam the Great IM, he says, he is proper useless, gave away the key players, now Habs are in rebuild mode for the next 5 to 7 years. I can't say they're in rebuild mode for the next 5 to 7 years. We have some really good prospects in the pipeline, and there are some good veteran players on the team like Carey Price and Shea Weber, and Jeff Petrie too. Craig Habs72 on Twitter says he gets a B- overall from me. Considering his entire tenure, more hits than misses. True, but that 2017 trade deadline and the Osner deal just stunk. People are hard on him because the team hasn't won FL in the playoffs since 2014. This is 2019-2020. Playoffs and wins have to come. Like most Habs fans, including myself, it's unacceptable Montreal being out of the playoffs a bunch of years in a row, but it's only been 2 years in a row, so it isn't so bad so far. George Russell Jr. on Twitter says, I'm excited as a Habs fan. I love the new makeup of this team. And I completely agree with him. I really hope we break out next year and it doesn't turn into a development year for the Habs. I really want him to make the playoffs this year. Derek Ford on Twitter says, ironically, his biggest failing might be loyalty. Holding on to Tyrion too long, holding on to Patches and Subban until it threatened to wreck the room, not moving Schrey back until he had no value left, but an excellent trader, ruthless when he commits and finds good bargains. And he had another point to make after that, Derek Ford did. Derek Ford on Twitter says, but the most important aspect of Bergy, I like that he learns from his mistakes and grows from it. His draft record has improved. Julian has adapted to a new, less conservative style. He realized Osler was a mistake and sent him to the NHL. I know he realized Osler was a mistake and sent him to the NHL, but I'm all for an Osler buyout. When he had the buyout option, he should have took it on Osler for sure. Carl Osler has to go. He's just the one bad part of Marc Bergevin's tenure that's still lingering with him. He's still in the system. Jay on Twitter says, "Great GM. I'm very excited about the deep prospect pool and the young guys already on the team. I'm glad we had a bit of a rebuild, and I think it will be 2 to 3 years." A lot of people share Jay consensus. A lot of people say the Habs haven't had a bad enough year to build through the draft. They've always been like a middle of the pack team, so they haven't been able to get really good draft picks. And within a year or two of being bad, they ended up getting Jesperi Kotkaniemi. They traded for Nick Suzuki. They got Cole Caulfield in this draft. Bill on Twitter says, "A good GM who has made a couple of mistakes, but overall, look what he has done for this team from 2017 to 2018. From last place to 97 points, and an effing exciting team, and a fantastic future. He's taken a lot of undeserved crap from certain media and fans," which is exactly why I made this video. Samard on Twitter says, "How can we think any other GM can do a better job than Marc Bergevin?" Well, there are some GMs who definitely have done a better job, but Marc Bergevin is a great GM. Dr. Prez on Twitter says, "I think he's a great GM. He has been on an absolute tear in the last 2 years with both trades and drafting. Players that have recently been coming and going have nothing but compliments towards him and the organization. Most players that have been coming and going, Nikita Schreibrack, he made quite a few comments about Bergevin, and they were pretty much all negative." Nicholas John Bedard on Facebook says, "Lock up Jake Gardiner. No point in having a dead cap next season. Would love to see a solid puck mover like Gardner added to the decor, unless he wants long term. But report mentioned he is willing to take a short term contract." So Nicholas thinks that Marc Bergevin should go out and lock up Jake Gardiner. That's the big piece that he needs to get, and I'm assuming he then would be happy with Bergy. Carrie Littleinen on Facebook says, "Well, he did a great job last offseason. I'm happy with the pickup of Sherratt, and I'm happy he didn't get rid of some of our kids that would be really good in a few years. The same people that will bitch because he did nothing, but if he traded some of the talent, then they'll bitch about him giving away the future." And that seems to be the deal with Marc Bergevin. You either love him or you hate him, but the guy just can't seem to do the right thing. In a lot of fans' opinions, not in my opinion. Paul B on Twitter says, "Mediocre. He can make some solid moves, but some questionable at times. Was poor at drafting, but certainly turned that around for the past few years. Like I say, last summer was his home run summer. He got the Max Domi for Alex Galchenyuk trade. He got a pick, Nick Suzuki, and Thomas Tatar for Max Pacioretty. And in my opinion, Thomas Tatar alone had a better season last year than what Patches did. Obviously, the Habs didn't make the playoffs, but he had a really good year." JF on Twitter says, "I think he's a good GM. Like any GM, he has his hits and misses. Personally, I think he had more hits." So JM is all about Marc Bergevin. He thinks he's had more hits than misses, and he's a big fan of the Montreal Canadiens and Marc Bergevin. Check that guy out on Twitter. He's a huge Habs fan. Give him a follow. Anton James Feenstra, he says, "Sherratt was a good signing. Blue line needed some size. MB is doing okay. His job will be safe if he can get us into the playoffs." I think his job's safe even if he doesn't get into the playoffs, because him and Jeff Molson are pretty good buddies, and Jeff Molson knows the plan. They want to see what these young prospects can do. The Habs aren't really in a rebuild or retool mode right now. Next season, they'll probably be a playoff team, but in the next few years, with the way the prospects are going, with the way the veterans are playing, if Carey Price can stay on the top of his game, the Habs could legitimately be a Stanley Cup contender, guys. But anyways, guys, thanks for the comments. I hope you liked the video. Don't forget to like. Don't forget to subscribe. Feel free to leave a comment on what you think of Marc Bergevin as a GM. And of course, have a great day. This is Scotty2Hockey, a.k.a. The Average Hockey Fan. Over and out.